Imagine a world where the only way to send a message was to shout across a valley or trust a stranger on horseback. Before text, before phones, before even ink on paper, humans still had something to say, and they found ways to say it. From smoke signals to ancient couriers, whispering secrets through empires, all the way to the moment a human voice first echoed through a wire. Tonight, we'll journey through the incredible history of human communication, how we've shared ideas, warnings, love, and power, from the simplest signals to the silent speed of satellites. Before we get started, take a second to like the video and subscribe. If this is the kind of journey you enjoy, it means a lot. I'd also love to know where you're joining from and what time it is on your side of the world. It's amazing how stories like this can bring us all together. Also, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is over there. I love seeing how far and wide our little community reaches. So take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let the story carry you from start to sleep. Smoke signals. Smoke signals are among the oldest methods of long distance communication, primarily used to convey visual messages across great distances. Traditionally, they serve to announce important news, signal danger, or gather people in one location. In ancient China, soldiers along the Great Wall used smoke signals from beacon towers to warn each other of enemy invasions. The color of the smoke indicated the size of the invading force. Beacon towers were positioned at regular intervals, with a soldier stationed in each, enabling messages to be relayed across the entire 7,300 kilometers of the wall. These signals also reached inner fortresses, allowing for a coordinated military response. However, misuse of smoke signals has had serious consequences. For example, one legend holds that in the 8th century BCE, King Yu of the Western Zhou dynasty used false signals to entertain his concubine, Bao Si, an act believed to have contributed to the fall of the dynasty. In Sri Lanka during the Kandyan period, soldiers stationed on mountaintops used smoke to warn of approaching enemies, be they English, Dutch, or Portuguese. These signals could alert the king in just a few hours. Indigenous peoples in North America also use smoke signals, each tribe developing its own unique signaling methods. Typically, they would ignite fires on elevated ground using damp grass to create thick smoke. The smoke's position along a hill or mountain carried specific meaning. Halfway up signified peace, while smoke from the summit indicated danger. Even today, colored smoke grenades are used by military forces to mark locations or request support. Similarly, some smoke-emitting devices are still used for distress signaling. Examples of smoke signal use the Catholic Church. Since the 19th century, the College of Cardinals has used smoke signals during papal conclaves to communicate the outcome of voting. Eligible cardinals vote in secret until one candidate receives a two-thirds majority plus one. After each round of voting, the ballots are burned. Since 1914, black smoke has signaled that no pope has been elected, while white smoke signifies the election of a new pope, Native Americans. In their journals, Lewis and Clark describe several instances in which they adopted the Native American practice of setting fire to planes as a form of communication. These signals were used to announce their presence or express a desire to meet with local tribes. The Yamana people of South America used smoke signals to communicate, especially when large events like a whale washing ashore occurred. Since such a find meant an abundance of meat, smoke signals alerted nearby communities to gather before it could spoil. It's believed they used smoke on other occasions as well, and some speculate that Magellan may have seen these signals, possibly inspiring the name Tierra del Fuego, Land of Fire. Cape Town's noon gun in Cape Town, the noon gun, a daily cannon firing, has historically served not only as a timekeeping device, but also as a smoke signal. Sailors used the smoke it produced to set their marine chronometers while anchored in Table Bay. Aboriginal Australians. Throughout Australia, Aboriginal communities have used smoke signals for various purposes. These included announcing one's arrival when entering foreign territory, alerting others to hostile incursions, or arranging meetings between different hunting groups. Signals were sent from ridges, lookout points, or by mobile tribal groups. In many cases, one signal prompted responses from others nearby. The color and shape of the smoke, black, white, or blue, and whether it formed columns, rings, or balls, helped convey different messages, sometimes even identifying specific individuals. However, like all forms of communication, these signals could be misinterpreted. In one case, a message meaning "we are coming" was mistakenly taken as a call to war, when it actually referred to a successful hunting party returning home. Goryeo and Joseon dynasties. In Korea, the beacon fire system known as Bongsu was officially institutionalized in 1149 during this Goryeo dynasty. Fire was used at night and smoke during the day. The system had 5 levels of alert, 1 torch for peace, and up to 5 torches to indicate an enemy landing. Messages were passed through local commanders to regional governors, and eventually reached the king through the royal secretariat. A sufficient relay ensured quick military coordination across vast distances. Pigeon post. Pigeon post refers to the use of homing pigeons to deliver messages. These birds are uniquely suited for this task thanks to their natural ability to navigate back to their home lofts across long distances. Messages were attached to the pigeons, often secured in small tubes on their legs, and the birds would then fly home, where the messages could be retrieved. Pigeon communication has been employed across many regions and time periods, especially during times of war, where they were known as war pigeons. Early history. The use of pigeons for communication likely dates back to ancient Persia. The Romans used them more than 2,000 years ago, and according to the historian Frontinus, Julius Caesar relied on pigeons during his conquest of Gaul. In ancient Greece, pigeons were used to announce the names of victors in the Olympic Games to their hometowns. Naval chaplain Henry Teong, writing in the 17th century, described a regular pigeon mail service operated by merchants between Iskenderun and Aleppo in the Levant. Similarly, the Mughal Empire in India maintained pigeon communication systems. Before the telegraph, before electrical telegraphs were widely adopted, pigeons played a significant role in financial communication. In the early 19th century, the Dutch government operated civil and military pigeon networks in Java and Sumatra. Paul Julius Reuter, later founder of the Reuters news agency, briefly used pigeons to transmit stock prices between Aachen and Brussels until a telegraph line was completed. Military and naval use. During the siege of Paris in 1870-71, pigeons were vital in maintaining communication with the outside world. Balloons carried pigeons out of the city. Once at a safe location, they were rested and then sent back into besieged Paris carrying miniature microfilm messages. Because the chance of interception or loss was high, messages were often duplicated and sent with multiple birds. The successful use of pigeons inspired many European militaries to establish formal pigeon units. Some nations went so far as to pass laws protecting messenger pigeons, train birds of prey to intercept enemy pigeons, and register pigeons as official military assets. In certain cases, even racing pigeons were recruited into service. Decline and modern uses. By the early 20th century, as radio and wireless telegraphy developed, pigeons were gradually phased out. However, some services persisted well into the 20th century. For example, during the First World War, France, Germany, and Russia maintained large pigeon forces. Britain's Admiralty eventually discontinued its pigeon program, though it had achieved high efficiency by that time. In modern times, pigeon post is mostly obsolete. However, there have been rare and creative uses. For instance, rafting photographers have occasionally used pigeons to deliver memory cards back to base while still on the river, effectively turning them into a biological version of a sneaker net. Pigeon post during the Siege of Paris, 1870-1871. One of the most well-known uses of pigeon post occurred during the Franco-Prussian War, when Paris was under siege from September 1870 to February 1871. With the city completely encircled and all conventional communication cut off, homing pigeons became the only reliable method of sending and receiving messages. As Prussian forces advanced, telegraph lines were destroyed, and even secret underwater cables in the Seine were discovered and severed. In the early days of the siege, a few couriers managed to escape the city, but most were caught or killed. Ultimately, it became clear that the only viable communication into Paris would be by air, specifically by pigeons carried out in balloons. Once outside the city, the pigeons were brought to regional bases, initially in Tours and later in Poitiers. After resting and being fed, they were loaded with messages and released to fly back to their home lofts in Paris. These birds often had to travel distances of 200 to 300 kilometers. Microfilm innovation. At first, pigeons carried handwritten messages, but with growing demand, a new solution was introduced. Microfilm. Messages were photographed, reduced in size, and rolled into tiny tubes. This innovation allowed each pigeon to carry dozens of messages at once. In one instance, a single microfilm contained 21 messages, 6 official and 15 private. To ensure delivery, each message was often sent with multiple pigeons. One official message was sent as many as 35 times. Reception and decoding. When a pigeon returned to its loft in Paris, its arrival triggered a bell. A watchman would immediately remove the tube and take it to the central telegraph office. There, the microfilm was projected onto a screen using a magic lantern or read under a microscope. Clerks transcribed the content by hand and converted it into standard telegrams, which were then delivered to the recipients. Despite the incredible complexity the system worked, during the 4 months of the siege, an estimated 150,000 official and 1 million private messages were successfully delivered into Paris using pigeons. The final days. The pigeon post service officially ended on February 1st, 1871. The last pigeons were released on February 1st, and 3. Those that survived the war were declared government property and sold at auction. Most fetched modest prices, though a few, known to have made multiple round trips, sold for significantly more. The extraordinary success of pigeon communication during the siege did not go unnoticed. European militaries quickly began establishing dedicated pigeon corps, but even with all their later uses, no pigeon service ever matched the scale or importance of the one used in Paris in 1870. Canada. In the late 19th century, Canada explored the use of pigeons for military and maritime communication. Major General Donald Roderick Cameron, who was then the commandant of the Royal Military College in Kingston, Ontario, proposed the creation of an international pigeon service. His idea was to support both military operations and marine search and rescue efforts. The concept gained official backing from Sir Charles Hibbert Tupper, Minister of Marine and Fisheries. Together with Colonel Goldie, Major Waldron of the Royal Artillery, and Captain Dopping Heppenstall of the Royal Engineers, the plan was implemented. Pigeon stations were established at lighthouses and lookout points on islands along Canada's east coast. These stations communicated with the mainland, specifically the Citadel in Halifax, Nova Scotia, using trained homing pigeons. The service operated between 1891 and 1895. However, the project faced significant challenges. Many pigeons did not survive the demanding flights over the Atlantic coastline. For instance, the journey between Halifax and Sable Island, a distance of about 300 kilometers over open ocean, proved too difficult for many birds to complete. Despite its relatively short lifespan, the Canadian pigeon post experiment reflected an important moment in the evolution of communication technology and emergency response. Catalina Island, between 1894 and 1898, a unique pigeon post service operated between Catalina Island and mainland California. The island's main settlement, Avalon, had no telegraph connection to Los Angeles, making communication difficult and slow. To bridge this gap, 2 pigeon enthusiasts, brothers Otto J. and O. F. Zahn, developed a creative solution. They trained 50 homing pigeons to carry messages across the 48-mile, roughly 77-kilometer stretch of ocean known as the Santa Barbara Channel. Each message was written in triplicate and attached to 3 different birds to ensure delivery, as predators and hunters posed a real threat along the route. The pigeons could complete the journey in about 1 hour. They carried letters, news clippings from the Los Angeles Times, and even urgent medical summons. The Zahn brothers made an arrangement with Western Union. In exchange for not building a telegraph line to Catalina Island, the company agreed not to compete with the pigeon service on the mainland. Although the pigeon post was remarkably reliable, only 2 messages failed to arrive during its entire operation. The service was not financially viable. At a rate of 50 cents to $1 per message, it was expensive. After 3 seasons, the brothers discontinued the operation in 1898. Despite its short run, the Catalina Island pigeon post stands as one of the more inventive and successful uses of animal-based communication in the pre-digital era. Great Barrier Island, New Zealand, Before the installation of a telegraph cable, Great Barrier Island, located about 90 kilometers northeast of Auckland, was one of New Zealand's most isolated communities. Communication with the mainland relied solely on a weekly coastal steamer, which meant that urgent news could take days to travel. This isolation became tragically clear in 1894, when the steamship SS Wairarapa was wrecked off the island's coast, resulting in the loss of 121 lives. It took several days for the news of the disaster to reach Auckland. In response, a pigeon post service was launched in 1897. Birds were carried by steamer from Auckland to the island, where they would be released with messages written on lightweight paper attached to their legs. They could carry up to 5 messages per flight. Soon, 2 competing pigeon post companies were operating, each issuing their own distinctive stamps, now prized collector's items due to their rarity. Initially, the service only operated in one direction, from the island to Auckland. Reverse communication was deemed too expensive. On the island itself, agencies were established at locations like Port Fitzroy, Okupu, and Wangaparapara. The pigeon post continued until 1908, when the first undersea telegraph cable was laid, permanently connecting Great Barrier Island to the mainland's communication network. In India, the Orissa Police Department operated a regular pigeon post service across several towns, including Cuttack, Chhatrapur, Kendrapara, Sambalpur, and Denkanal. These trained birds played a key role in delivering emergency messages during natural disasters and times of crisis. The pigeons famously demonstrated their value during the 1954 centenary celebrations of the Indian Postal Service. They carried a special message from the President of India to the Prime Minister showcasing their reliability and symbolic importance. This pigeon post was among the last of its kind in the world. While regular operations were officially discontinued in 2008, around 150 pigeons are still maintained for ceremonial purposes at Cuttack and at the Police Training College in Angul. Message in a bottle. The concept of placing a message in a bottle and setting it adrift on water has captivated human imagination for centuries. It's a form of communication in which a message, usually written on paper, is sealed in a bottle or similar container and released into the sea, a river, or even the ocean. Over the years, bottles have carried everything from distress signals and expedition reports to memorials, love letters, and scientific data. Historically, these drifting messages have served multiple purposes: practical, poetic, and scientific. Origins and history. The practice of sending messages in bottles dates as far back as 310 BC, when the Greek philosopher Theophrastus is said to have used them in experiments to study ocean currents. In Japan, a 12th century poem describes a message cast into the sea by an exiled poet. By the 16th century, the English monarchy took the idea seriously. Queen Elizabeth reportedly appointed an uncorker of ocean bottles and forbade others from opening such bottles under threat of death, fearing they might contain sensitive information from naval forces. Although this decree is likely more legend than law, it highlights the mystique surrounding this unusual form of communication. The romantic notion of the message in a bottle gained popularity in literature, most notably in Edgar Allan Poe's 1833 story MS, Found in a Bottle, and later in Charles Dickens' A Message from the Sea. These stories helped elevate the message in a bottle from a practical tool to a powerful metaphor for hope, loss, and the unknown. Scientific applications. Beyond romance and poetry, bottles have played a key role in scientific exploration, especially in the study of ocean currents. Known as drift bottles, these tools were used in crowdsourced studies of how ocean waters move. In the mid-1700s, Benjamin Franklin and others conducted early drift experiments that led to the discovery and mapping of the Gulf Stream. In the 1800s, Rear Admiral Alexander Becher built a network of beachcombers to collect bottle papers and track ocean gyres. Later, Prince Albert I of Monaco confirmed the Gulf Stream's branching patterns by using bottles to map the North Atlantic Drift and Azores Current. Drift bottle studies continued into the 20th century, with scientists releasing hundreds of thousands of bottles around the world. These bottles helped track fish egg migration, oil spill movement, and even debris from shipwrecks. Wooden blocks and later plastic drifters were designed to simulate how pollutants travel. These experiments also assisted in predicting safe shipping routes by tracking how naval mines and dangerous materials might move. Although recovery rates of these bottles were often low, frequently less than 3%, valuable insights were still gained. Researchers noted that the majority of marine debris tends to wash up on only about 10% of the world's coastlines, often those perpendicular to dominant currents. Some drift bottles were weighted to hover just above the seabed, offering insight into deep ocean currents. Others floated near the surface to follow wind-influenced paths. Bottles varied in design and often included safeguards like cork reinforcements or sand ballast to improve stability and sealing. Today, high-tech drifters equipped with GPS and satellite uplinks have largely replaced the humble glass bottle. However, the original idea of setting something adrift and waiting for a response still holds symbolic and practical appeal. Modern uses and public imagination. Even now, messages in bottles continue to appear. They've been used to fulfill promises to lost loved ones, to scatter ashes, or simply to reach out in hopes of connection. Some survivors of shipwrecks or abandonment at sea have written desperate messages in bottles. Others have cast hopeful letters in search of pen pals, closure, or serendipity. Environmental scientists now favor biodegradable alternatives like drift cards or wooden floats to reduce plastic waste, but the magic of the message in a bottle endures. In many ways, each bottle is a small time capsule, launched blindly into the world with no guaranteed destination. Whether found months or decades later, each recovery offers a unique window into human emotion, history, or scientific discovery. Notable historical examples of messages in bottles. Over the centuries, thousands of messages in bottles have been cast into the sea, some as cries for help, others as scientific tools, and many simply as emotional expressions. A few of these messages have become legendary. Early messages. In 1841, a British ship named Wellington released a message in the mid-Atlantic to contribute data for the study of ocean currents. Just 6 years later, in 1847, a message dropped from the Eagle, a relief ship carrying corn to famine-stricken Ireland, was retrieved months later off Newfoundland. These early recoveries revealed new insights into the movement of ocean waters. In 1856, a bottle washed ashore in Scotland bearing a message believed to come from the ill-fated SS Pacific, claiming the ship had struck an iceberg. No survivors were ever found, and the bottle became the only trace of the vessel's fate. In 1875, a remarkable series of 24 messages were sent from the British sailing ship Lenny, warning that mutineers had murdered the captain and officers. Two survivors, one a ship's steward, the other a cabin boy, launched the messages in bottles. One was found, prompting a successful rescue and the arrest of the mutineers. St. Kilda Mailboat, 1876. On the remote Scottish island of St. Kilda, journalist John Sands and a group of Austrian sailors became stranded. With no other way to contact the mainland, they sealed notes inside cocoa tins, tied them to sheep bladders for buoyancy, and set them adrift. Within days, the messages were discovered in Orkney and on the Scottish mainland, prompting a successful rescue. This unique form of communication became known as the St. Kilda Mailboat, a practice later repeated by visitors to the island as tradition. Titanic and Lusitania. Numerous accounts claim that passengers aboard the Titanic and the Lusitania wrote farewell messages before their deaths and cast them into the sea. While many such stories were later revealed to be hoaxes, the idea of a final message in a bottle resonated deeply with the public and continues to appear in popular culture to this day. Zeppelin L-19, 1916. After a German Zeppelin was damaged in battle and crashed into the North Sea, its crew, stranded on a raft, released bottles containing letters to their families and military command. One bottle, discovered months later in Sweden, described how a passing British trawler refused to rescue them, fearing they might be overpowered. The account sparked heated debate in newspapers across Europe. Frances Wilson Grayson, 1927. Frances Wilson Grayson, niece of U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, disappeared while attempting to become the first woman to fly across the Atlantic. A year later, a bottle washed ashore in Massachusetts containing a message claiming to be from her doomed flight. While the message was never confirmed, it remains part of the mystery surrounding her disappearance. Kamloops Shipwreck, 1927. In Canada, a heartbreaking message was found months after the freighter Kamloops sank during a blizzard on Lake Superior. Written by Alice Bettridge, a young stewardess, the note read, "I'm the last one alive, freezing and starving to death on Isle Royale." Her bottle was found at the mouth of the Agawa River, long after her death. The Flying Dutchman, 1929 and 1935. A German scientific expedition launched a bottle from the southern Indian Ocean with instructions for finders to record its location and release it again. Over the next 6 years, it was recovered and re released multiple times, eventually traveling over 25,000 kilometers across the globe. Nicknamed the Flying Dutchman, the bottle remains one of the most well documented traveling messages in history. World War II messages. In 1941, a dying Italian sailor aboard the sinking Fiume penned a farewell letter to his mother and sealed it in a bottle. It was found years later on the Sardinian coast. In 1943, a bottle dropped by an Australian soldier in 1916 was found near Tasmania, nearly 3 decades after he had written the message while sailing to war. And in 1945, an American soldier tossed a message in a lemonade bottle off the coast of New York on Christmas Day. 8 months later, it was found on an Irish beach, sparking an international romance, which I'll expand on in the next section if you like. Messages in bottles, from post-war romance to the digital age. After World War II, messages in bottles continued to surface, sometimes as poetic gestures, other times as scientific tools or acts of desperation. Many of these post-war stories illustrate how this humble form of communication has remained powerful even in the age of technology. Frank Hayostek and Breda O'Sullivan, 1945-1952. On Christmas Day, 1945, 21-year-old American medical corpsman Frank Hayostek tossed a message in a bottle off the side of his ship as he returned home from Europe. 8 months later, his message washed up on the Irish coast, where it was found by 18-year-old milkmaid Breda O'Sullivan. Their correspondence captured the imagination of the world. In 1952, Hayostek traveled to Ireland to meet Breda in person. Newspapers followed every moment of the story, framing it as a real-life romance. However, the overwhelming media attention ultimately drove them apart. Though they remained in touch for a time, they eventually married other people. Their bittersweet story is still remembered as one of the most famous message-in-a-bottle romances of the 20th century. The Flying Bottle from Antarctica, 1955. In 1955, a bottle launched during a 1903 German Antarctic expedition was found in New Zealand, more than 5,000 kilometers from its origin. Scientists believed it had likely circled the globe several times, driven by powerful currents. The Sicilian Bride, 1956-1958. In 1956, a Swedish sailor named Aki Viking dropped a bottle into the ocean containing a simple but heartfelt message to someone beautiful and far away. It was found by a 17-year-old Sicilian girl named Paulina. Their correspondence blossomed into love, and they were married in 1958. Their wedding was celebrated by over 4,000 people, making international headlines. Guinness Beer's Ocean Campaign, 1959. In one of the most ambitious marketing stunts of the 20th century, Guinness Brewery released 150,000 bottles into the Atlantic and Caribbean. Each bottle contained a promotional message. Some made it as far north as the Arctic Circle. Inuit hunters on Coates Island, Canada, reported finding dozens of them. Cold War Discovery, 1969 and 1972. A Canadian expedition dropped a message bottle at the North Pole in 1969. It was recovered 3 years later in Iceland, highlighting the vast movement of currents even in the icy Arctic Ocean. Famous centenarian finds. In 2006, a fisherman near the Shetland Islands retrieved a bottle that had been adrift for over 92 years. It had been part of a scientific release in 1914 by the Marine Laboratory in Aberdeen, intended to study undersea currents. Then, in 2012, a second bottle from the same experiment was recovered, this one having floated for nearly 98 years. The all-time record came in 2018, when a message launched in 1886 from a German bark was discovered on a beach in Western Australia. At 131 years old, it became the world's oldest known message in a bottle, messages of love and loss. In 2002, a tear shaped bottle washed up in England. Inside was an anonymous letter from a French mother grieving the loss of her 13-year-old son. British author Karen Liebrick spent years trying to identify the sender. When the woman was finally found, she said she had not intended for the letter to be read, only released into the sea as a private act of mourning. In 2019, a Gatorade bottle containing a heartfelt 4-page tribute was found on a remote Australian beach. The message, sent from Argentina by mother and her children, honored a beloved father who had died from a stroke. Unusual and emergency cases. In 2016, Cuban migrants detained aboard a U.S. Coast Guard vessel launched an SOS message in a bottle to protest their conditions. In 2019, 3 hikers stranded near a California waterfall were rescued after their bottled SOS message was discovered downstream. In 2017, a Scottish widower released 2,000 bottles in hopes of finding love. He received dozens of replies before being investigated for littering. In 2025, a violin crafted in the Dachau concentration camp was found to contain a hidden note from the Jewish luthier who built it, explaining it had been made under inhumane conditions with no proper tools. The maker survived the war. Legacy and meaning. For many, the message in a bottle is more than just a physical note. It's a symbol, a romantic gesture, a cry for help, a hope for connection. Some view it as surrendering a part of themselves to the unknown. Others see it as a prayer sent into the vastness of the world, not knowing who will answer, or when. Even in an era dominated by satellites, smartphones, and instant messaging, the idea of a fragile bottle drifting through time and water still captures our imagination. Telegraphy refers to the long-distance transmission of messages using symbolic codes understood by both the sender and receiver, rather than physically transporting a message. For example, flag semaphore is a form of telegraphy, whereas using pigeons to carry messages is not. Ancient signal systems, though sometimes elaborate, like those in China, were typically limited to a fixed set of prearranged messages, and thus do not qualify as true telegraphs. The first true telegraph system to see widespread use was the optical telegraph developed by Claude Chappe in the late 18th century. This system gained extensive application in France and its territories during the Napoleonic period. Eventually, optical telegraphs were replaced by electrical ones in the mid-19th century. Britain was among the first adopters, implementing the Cook and Wheatstone telegraph, primarily for railway signaling. Around the same time in the United States, Samuel Morse developed a different system that became globally influential. France was slower to embrace the electric telegraph due to its already extensive optical network, but eventually adopted an electrical version compatible with the Chappe code. In 1865, the Morse system became the international standard, using a modified version of Morse code first developed in Germany in 1848. The heliograph, a telegraph using reflected sunlight, was used in areas where electrical systems had not yet reached. These devices typically used Morse code and were particularly prevalent in the American Southwest during the Apache Wars. Remarkably, heliographs remained part of military equipment into World War II. As telegraph services became more affordable, telegrams emerged as a popular method of communication. The high volume of traffic prompted the development of automated systems, like teleprinters and punch tape, introducing new telegraph codes, such as the Bodo code. However, telegrams were ultimately outcompeted by telephone services and later by internet-based communication, leading to the decline of the telegraph from the 1920s onward. Terminology. A telegraph is a device used to send and receive messages over long distances. Without a qualifier, the term typically refers to an electrical telegraph. When used over radio, it's referred to as wireless telegraphy. Samuel Morse believed that only systems capable of transmitting and recording messages at a distance should be called telegraphs. Systems like semaphore or smoke signals, which simply convey messages visually without recording, he considered different in nature. A telegraph message sent via Morse code or a similar system was known as a telegram. Messages sent by undersea cables were called cablegrams, often shortened to cables or wires. The suffix gram, from the Greek gramma, means something written. Thus, telegram implies something written from afar. Later systems included the telex, which transmitted messages over a network of teleprinters, similar to a phone network. Wire photos, or wire pictures, were photographs sent by telegraph. Diplomatic cables, or telegrams, referred to official communications between embassies and their home governments, and are still commonly referred to by these terms, regardless of how they're transmitted. History of telegraphy. Early signaling systems. The practice of transmitting messages over long distances dates back to ancient times. One of the earliest known systems was the series of signal towers along China's Great Wall. As early as 400 BCE, beacon fires and drum beats were used for basic communication, and by 200 BCE, the use of flags had evolved into a more complex method. During the Han Dynasty, 202 BCE, 220 CE, messages were sent using flags and smoke. At night, signalers used fire, while during the day, smoke was created with the addition of wolf dung for visibility. By the Tang Dynasty, 618 of 907 CE, messages could travel over 1,100 kilometers in just 24 hours. The Ming Dynasty later added artillery as a signaling method. Despite their sophistication, these systems could only transmit predefined messages. Such signaling networks extended beyond the Great Wall, with additional towers built to protect key trade routes, such as the Silk Road. In Europe, similar systems existed. The Roman military utilized signal fires extensively, and remnants of these towers can still be found. However, few records detail how messages were encoded. One exception was the system created by Aeneas Tacticus in the 4th century BCE, which involved synchronized water clocks. Each station had a pot filled with water and a floating scale marked with specific messages. Signalers used torches to coordinate the draining of water, allowing the recipient to identify the corresponding message on their scale. Despite their ingenuity, these systems were limited. They could not send arbitrary messages over arbitrary distances, key features of a true telegraph. Most used fixed codes with restricted vocabularies. An exception may have been the system proposed by Polybius in the 2nd century BCE. He designed a method using torch pairs to represent the coordinates of letters within a 5x5 alphabet grid. While it's unclear whether this system was ever widely used, ancient texts suggest it may have been employed during the First Macedonian War. Later developments wouldn't surpass this level of flexibility until the 17th century, when Franz Kessler introduced an early alphabetic telegraph using a lamp and a movable shutter, viewed through a telescope. Optical telegraph. The optical telegraph was a breakthrough in long-distance communication. This system involved a series of towers positioned on high ground, each equipped with mechanical signaling devices, such as shutters, paddles, or semaphore arms, that could be seen from the next station down the line. Early concepts for optical telegraphs date back to Robert Hooke's proposals to the Royal Society in 1684, and were first tested by Sir Richard Lovell Edgeworth in 1767. However, the first truly effective and large-scale optical telegraph was invented by Claude Chappe in France in 1793. At the height of the French Revolution, the need for fast, centralized communication led to the adoption of Chappe's system. On March 2, 1791, the Chappe brothers successfully transmitted a message over 16 kilometers. By 1792, Claude Chappe had been appointed engineer telegraphista and oversaw the construction of a telegraph line from Paris to Lille. This 230-kilometer route allowed near-instantaneous communication of military dispatches. For example, news of the French capture of Condé-sur-Lescaut in 1794 was reported in under an hour. Chappe's system continued to be used well into the 19th century, with its final decommissioning occurring around 1855, despite plans to replace it with electric telegraphs as early as 1846. Other countries, including Sweden and Prussia, developed their own versions. However, all optical systems relied on clear weather and daylight, and even under ideal conditions, could only manage around 2 words per minute. France maintained coastal semaphore stations for ship-to-shore communication until at least 1895. Electrical telegraph. While optical telegraphs revolutionized long-distance messaging, it was the electric telegraph that truly transformed global communication. Early concepts of electrical telegraphs began in the mid-18th century. In 1753, a system based on the electrostatic movement of pith balls was proposed. Later efforts included electrochemical approaches by Campillo in 1804 and von Sommering in 1809. However, these early designs were impractical for widespread use. The first functional long-distance system was created by Francis Ronalds in 1816 using static electricity. Despite its success, the British Admiralty rejected it, preferring their optical network between London and Portsmouth. Optical systems dominated well into the mid-19th century, especially in France. Eventually, electrostatic systems were abandoned in favor of electromagnetic ones. In 1832, Baron Pavel Schilling demonstrated an early electromagnetic telegraph in Russia. While plans to link St. Petersburg and Kronstadt never materialized, Schilling's work laid the foundation for future systems. Shortly after, in 1833, Carl Friedrich Gauss and Wilhelm Weber built a working line over 1 kilometer to study the Earth's magnetic field, an early application of electrical telegraphy. The first commercial electric telegraph came in 1837, patented by William Fothergill Cooke and Charles Wheatstone in Britain. Initially used on railways, their system demonstrated the potential of fast, wired communication. By 1839, it spanned 21 kilometers between Paddington and West Drayton stations. Although railway companies hesitated at first, Cooke persuaded them by offering public use of the lines, marking the start of broader commercial telegraphy. Meanwhile, in the United States, Samuel Morse and Alfred Vail developed a simplified single-wire system using a coded language, Morse code. By 1844, a line connected Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, and by 1861, the east and west coasts were linked. Although the Morse system became the international standard in 1865, Britain and its empire continued using the Cooke and Wheatstone needle-based codes in some regions well into the 20th century. In the U.S., American Morse code remained in use for domestic communication, requiring bilingual operators to handle international messages. Railway telegraphy. In the 1840s, telegraphy became a vital tool for railway systems in Britain. It played a key role in managing train movements and improving safety, ultimately helping to prevent accidents. The first practical use occurred in June 1837, when Cooke and Wheatstone received a patent for their electric telegraph. That same year, it was tested between Euston Station and an engine house in Camden Town. Robert Stephenson, chief engineer of the London and Birmingham Railway, witnessed the demonstration, which was designed to coordinate the rope haulage of trains up a steep gradient. In 1839, the world's first permanent railway telegraph was installed between London Paddington and West Drayton. It used a 4-needle system to communicate status updates and train movements over a 21-kilometer stretch of track. By 1842, Cooke proposed a signaling concept based on dividing railway lines into sections or blocks. Entry into each block required authorization via telegraph. Semaphore signals along the tracks reflected the block's status, line clear or line blocked, based on the telegraph's messages. At first, each station had a full array of needles, representing every other station along the line. But as rail networks expanded, a more practical system was adopted. Pairs of single-needle instruments were used for each direction of travel on each block. Wigwag signaling. Wigwag signaling was a military adaptation of flag-based communication, using a single flag to transmit messages over long distances, sometimes as far as 32 kilometers. Unlike traditional two-flag semaphore, Wigwag used motion, rather than static positions, to encode symbols. This made the signal easier to detect at long range. Invented in the 1850s by U.S. Army surgeon Albert J. Meyer, Wigwag filled a gap in military communications during the American Civil War. Electrical telegraphs were still limited in reach, and mobile field systems were not yet widespread. Wigwag enabled messages to be relayed across battlefields and remote posts using towers and mountaintops as signal stations. Some towers were built to immense heights, forming a network robust enough to serve as a reliable communication backbone throughout the conflict. Heliograph. The heliograph is a telegraph device that transmits messages using flashes of sunlight reflected by a mirror, typically using Morse code. The concept was first suggested by Carl Friedrich Gauss in 1821 as a modification to surveying instruments. Over time, it was refined for military use. The first widely adopted heliograph system was developed by Henry Mance in 1869. During the 1870-71 siege of Paris, the French used heliographs for communication, substituting kerosene lamps for sunlight at night. An improved version was adopted by the British military and used in numerous colonial campaigns, including the Anglo-Zulu War in 1879. Later enhancements included integrating a Morse key, giving the operator the same control as with a wired telegraph. Another variant, the heliostat, used a fixed mirror and employed a column shutter to create light pulses. This technique was first designed for ship-to-ship communication within the Royal Navy. The heliograph saw widespread use in the American Southwest under General Nelson A. Miles during the Apache Wars. His network spanned up to 480 kilometers and allowed messages to be relayed over 400 kilometers in just 4 hours. It was ideal for arid, mountainous regions with clear skies. Though its military use declined after 1915, the heliograph remained in service during World War II, particularly among Commonwealth forces and desert campaigns. It was even used by Afghan fighters during the Soviet-Afghan War in the 1980s. Teleprinter. The teleprinter marked a major step forward in telegraph technology, enabling typed messages to be transmitted and printed in plain text without the need for operators to know Morse code. It evolved from earlier printing telegraphs and significantly boosted transmission speeds. The Morse telegraph initially relied on paper tape to record indentations. In 1846, Alexander Bain improved this with a chemical telegraph that marked tape using electric current and chemicals. However, legal disputes with Morse delayed its use. Later developments introduced machines that printed characters using a rotating wheel of type, similar to a daisy wheel printer. David Edward Hughes improved this system in 1855, and it was eventually adopted by Western Union. Early teleprinters used the Bodo code, a 5-bit binary code. Developed in 1874, this code replaced Morse's variable length format with fixed length sequences, making it more compatible with mechanical devices. Bodo's system was adapted for ticker tape machines, which delivered real-time financial data to businesses and investors. Automated punch tape transmission. To improve efficiency and speed, punch tape systems were introduced. Messages were first typed onto a tape using Morse or other telegraph codes. The tape was then fed into a transmitter, which rapidly sent the message over the line. This approach allowed multiple messages to be prepared in advance and transmitted continuously, maximizing line usage. This method was especially valuable on high-traffic routes, where preparing messages offline saved both time and cost. The earliest machine using punch tape was Bain's system in 1843, capable of transmitting up to 1,000 words per minute, far beyond human capability. In 1858, Charles Wheatstone introduced a more widely adopted system. His design, used by the British General Post Office, employed bipolar encoding, sending both positive and negative voltage signals, which improved transmission quality and allowed for duplex, two-way communication. Wheatstone's tape readers could transmit at speeds of 400 words per minute. Oceanic telegraph cables. To create a truly global communication network, telegraph cables had to be laid across oceans. On land, telegraph lines were typically suspended between poles and left uninsulated, but for underwater use, a new kind of insulation was needed, something flexible, waterproof, and durable. The solution came with the discovery of gutta percha, a natural latex harvested from the palicquium tree. In 1843, William Montgomery sent samples to London from Singapore. British scientist Michael Faraday tested the material, and Charles Wheatstone soon proposed using it to insulate an undersea cable between Dover and Calais. A 3-kilometer gutta percha cable was successfully tested off the coast of Folkestone by the Southeastern Railway. The first attempt to lay a submarine cable to France took place in 1850, but failed after it was accidentally cut by a fishing vessel. A year later, it was successfully relayed, and soon after, cables were extended to Ireland and continental Europe. Laying a cable across the Atlantic Ocean proved far more difficult. The Atlantic Telegraph Company was founded in London in 1856 and attempted several crossings. A cable laid in 1858 did work, briefly, but the high voltages used to increase speed ultimately destroyed it. This failure, however, drove key figures like William Thomson, later Lord Kelvin, and Oliver Heaviside to develop improved theoretical models for long distance transmission. In 1866, the first successful and reliable transatlantic cable was laid by the SS Great Eastern, the largest ship of its time, designed by Isambard Kingdom Brunel. This marked a turning point in global communication. An overland telegraph from Britain to India was completed in 1866, though its reliability was limited. By 1870, a submarine cable replaced the route. That same year, Australia was connected to the world via Darwin. Britain soon consolidated many cable operations under the Eastern Telegraph Company established in 1872. From the mid 1800s through the early 20th century, British firms controlled most of the world's submarine cable network, an arrangement known as the All Red Line. By 1896, Britain owned 24 of the world's 30 cable-laying ships. In 1892, it operated two-thirds of the world's submarine cables. Even by 1923, it still controlled over 40%. During World War I, Britain's dominance paid off. It was able to maintain almost uninterrupted communication while quickly severing Germany's global cable connections. Facsimile transmission. In 1843, Scottish inventor Alexander Bain created what is considered the first facsimile machine, which he called the recording telegraph. His invention transmitted images through electrical wires by drawing marks on chemically treated paper. Frederick Bakewell improved Bain's design and demonstrated a version capable of sending scanned drawings. In 1855, Italian priest Giovanni Caselli developed the pantelegraph, which could send images between Paris and Lyon and became the first commercial fax system. Later innovations included Shelford Bidwell's scanning phototelegraph in 1881, the first device that could scan any two-dimensional image without manual tracing. Around 1900, German physicist Arthur Korn developed the Bild telegraph, which gained popularity in Europe, especially after it was used in 1908 to transmit a photograph of a wanted person from Paris to London. This technology continued evolving into radio-based fax systems, such as the Bellinograph by Eduard Bellin and the Hellschreiber developed by Rudolf Hell in 1929, devices that would remain in use for decades. Wireless telegraphy. By the late 1880s and early 1890s, scientists began to experiment with a new form of communication, wireless telegraphy. This innovation used electromagnetic waves, what we now call radio waves, to transmit messages without physical wires. Early pioneers, including Heinrich Hertz, proved the existence of these waves in laboratory experiments. These discoveries laid the groundwork for practical systems of long-distance wireless communication. The key advantage of wireless telegraphy was its independence from cable infrastructure, making it especially useful in maritime and military settings. Ships at sea, isolated islands, and remote territories could now maintain contact with the rest of the world. Initially, wireless systems were used for Morse code communication, mirroring the function of traditional electric telegraphs. However, their range and reliability quickly improved, and they became a serious competitor to submarine cables, particularly for international and naval use. By the early 20th century, wireless telegraphy was increasingly adopted by ships for distress signaling and navigation. The famous SOS call from the Titanic in 1912 was transmitted using a wireless telegraph, demonstrating its life-saving potential. As the technology matured, wireless telegraphy eventually gave way to voice transmission and later to digital communications. Nonetheless, it marked a significant leap in the evolution of global communication, untethered by wires and unrestricted by geography. The telex system marked a major evolution in telegraphic communication. It functioned as a switched network of teleprinters, similar in structure to a telephone system, but designed specifically for the transmission of typed messages. Using the Baudot code, a 5-bit binary system, telex allowed subscribers to send text-based messages across a global network. Unlike traditional telegraphy, which often required human operators to interpret and relay Morse code, telex users could input and receive messages directly via a typewriter-style interface. The system became widely adopted in the mid-20th century for business, government, and press communications. It provided an efficient, reliable means of transmitting documents, invoices, press releases, and diplomatic communications. Telex machines could also be automated to transmit pre-recorded messages using punch tape. Telex remained in use even after the rise of fax machines and early computer networks, especially in regions where digital infrastructure was not yet available. In many countries, telex systems were operated by state postal or telecommunications authorities, forming part of the official communication backbone. Wire photo, also known as wire picture, was a method for transmitting photographs over telegraph lines. This innovation allowed newspapers to receive and publish images from remote locations long before the development of digital photography or email. Using a form of facsimile transmission, the wire photo process involves scanning a photographic image and converting it into electrical signals. These signals were sent over telegraph or telephone lines to a receiving device, which reconstructed the image line by line. Wire photo became especially popular with news agencies in the 1930s and 1940s, as it allowed for rapid distribution of news photos from battlefields, political events, and sporting competitions. Though now obsolete, wire photo played a vital role in the evolution of mass media and image-based journalism. Diplomatic telegrams. A diplomatic telegram, also referred to as a diplomatic cable, is a confidential message exchanged between a diplomatic mission and its home government. Traditionally sent via telegraph, these communications were often encoded for security and classified by importance. Despite the rise of email and encrypted digital messaging, the term diplomatic telegram, or cable, remains in use today in foreign ministries and embassies around the world. Diplomatic telegrams play a crucial role in international relations, allowing embassies and consulates to report on political developments, convey instructions, or coordinate sensitive negotiations. Their historical importance is evident in events such as the Cuban Missile Crisis, where cables between Washington and Moscow influenced global decisions. These communications, while now transmitted over secure digital networks, retain their traditional names and formats, highlighting the enduring legacy of telegraphy in the realm of diplomacy. Closing note: from smoke signals and semaphore towers to submarine cables and wireless transmission, the evolution of telegraphy represents one of the most significant transformations in human communication. It laid the groundwork for our modern information society, enabling near instantaneous contact across continents, advancing military coordination, global trade, and diplomacy. Though largely replaced by newer technologies, the legacy of telegraphy endures in both language and infrastructure. Terms like wire, telegram, and cable still echo through our communication systems, a tribute to an era that revolutionized how the world connected. Pony Express. The Pony Express was a short-lived but legendary mail service that operated in the United States between April 1860 and October 1861. It provided one of the fastest means of delivering messages, mail, and small parcels across the vast expanse between Missouri and California, nearly 3,200 kilometers, or 2,000 miles, at a time when no coast-to-coast telegraph or railway existed. The system worked by using a relay of horseback riders who changed horses at stations placed roughly 16 kilometers, 10 miles, apart. Riders typically rode 120 to 160 kilometers in a single shift before handing off the mail pouch, called a mochila, to the next rider. The Pony Express could deliver a letter across the continent in about 10 days, an impressive feat for the time. Its speed made it particularly valuable for businesses, newspapers, and government correspondence in the Western Territories. Despite its success in demonstrating the potential of rapid overland communication, the Pony Express was financially unsustainable. The completion of the transcontinental telegraph line in October 1861 rendered the service obsolete. Just 2 days after the line was completed, the Pony Express officially ceased operations. Still, its brief existence captured the imagination of the American public, and it remains a powerful symbol of determination, frontier endurance, and innovation in communication history. Origins and founding. The need for a rapid mail service arose from California's explosive growth following the 1848 gold rush. By 1860, California's population had reached 380,000, and there was a pressing demand to strengthen communication with the rest of the Union. Businessmen William Russell, Alexander Majors, and William B. Waddell, already successful in freight and logistics, launched the Pony Express as part of their bid to win a federal mail contract. Their company, Russell, Majors, and Waddell, had extensive resources, over 6,000 employees, 75,000 oxen, thousands of wagons, and a large commercial network. They believed that a route using mounted couriers could outperform the traditional stagecoach system. They proposed delivering letters between St. Joseph, Missouri, and Sacramento, California, in just 10 days, an ambitious goal many believed impossible. Operations en route. Within 2 months, they built the Pony Express. 80 riders, 184 stations, 400 horses, and hundreds of support staff. Riders were recruited under strict criteria. They had to be young, lightweight, and tough. Legend has it an ad read, "Wanted, young, skinny, wiry fellows not over 18. Must be expert riders, willing to risk death daily. Orphans preferred." Though the ad's authenticity is debated, the spirit behind it is widely accepted. The route spanned approximately 1,900 miles. It followed the Oregon and California trails to Fort Bridger, Wyoming, then the Mormon Trail to Salt Lake City, before cutting across Nevada to reach Sacramento. From there, mail traveled by boat to San Francisco. Along the route, stations were spaced every 10 to 15 miles. Swing stations allowed riders to quickly switch to fresh horses, while home stations provided rest and food between shifts. Riders typically covered 75 to 100 miles per day, riding day and night, sometimes for over 20 hours straight in emergencies. The mail pouch, called a mochila, was treated with utmost importance. Riders carried little else, often only a revolver and a water sack. The mochila held around 20 pounds of mail and was secured to the saddle by the rider's weight. Losing it was considered unacceptable, even if the horse or rider was lost. First journeys. The first westbound delivery began on April 3, 1860, from St. Joseph. After speeches and a ceremonial send-off, the rider crossed the Missouri River by ferry and sped toward California. The mochila reached Salt Lake City 6 days later and arrived in San Francisco on April 14th, 10 days after departure. The delivery included letters from President Buchanan, government dispatches, and newspapers from New York and Chicago. The identity of the first rider is debated, likely Johnny Fry or Billy Richardson. The eastbound trip began simultaneously from Sacramento, also arriving in 10 days. Fewer than 250 pieces of Pony Express mail survive today, in part because early postage cost up to $5 for a half ounce, a fortune at the time. Notable riders and figures. About 80 riders were active at any one time. They were supported by 400 other employees, including station keepers and route managers. Notable figures like Buffalo Bill Cody and Wild Bill Hickok were associated with the service, although Hickok served only as a stock tender. Author Mark Twain described the riders as usually a little bit of a man, referring to their youth and small stature. They later became celebrated figures of the Wild West. Alexander Majors, deeply religious, gave each rider a special edition Bible and required them to sign an oath of conduct, swearing to abstain from profanity, alcohol, and immoral behavior. Role in the 1860 election. One of the Pony Express's most publicized achievements was during the 1860 presidential election. William Russell used the service to deliver news of Abraham Lincoln's victory from Fort Kearny, Nebraska, to California. Extra riders and horses were deployed to ensure fast delivery. California received the election results just 7 days and 17 hours after the East Coast, a record-setting feat at the time. Challenges and the Paiute War. In May 1860, the service faced serious disruption during the Paiute War in Nevada. Several stations were attacked, 16 employees were killed, and over 150 horses were stolen or lost. Mail service was briefly suspended. The company lost around $75,000 in damages, over $2.6 million in today's terms. Despite this, the system quickly recovered. Incredibly, one mail pouch delayed during the conflict was still delivered nearly 2 years after it left San Francisco. Decline and legacy. The Pony Express was ultimately overtaken by the telegraph. On October 24, 1861, the first transcontinental telegraph line was completed. 2 days later, the Pony Express ceased operations. Although it failed as a business, the service proved the feasibility of rapid, coordinated, coast to coast communication. It became an American legend, celebrated for the courage of its riders and the scale of its ambition. Even today, the Pony Express remains a powerful symbol of endurance, determination, and the spirit of the frontier. Balloon mail. Balloon mail refers to the delivery of letters and messages by means of unmanned or manned balloons, particularly during times when traditional communication methods were disrupted. Its most notable use occurred during wartime sieges, when cities were cut off from the outside world. The most famous instance of balloon mail took place during the Siege of Paris in 1870-1871, amidst the Franco-Prussian War. As Prussian forces surrounded the city and severed telegraph lines, the French government and postal services turned to the skies. Beginning in September 1870, balloons were launched from Paris to transport mail, official dispatches, and even passengers. Initially, pigeons were carried aboard to be released upon arrival at destinations outside the city, with the intent of flying back to Paris carrying microfilmed replies. More than 60 manned balloons were launched during the siege. These balloons, often assembled quickly and inflated with coal gas, carried mail bags, pigeons, and occasionally journalists, politicians, or military couriers. The first successful flight was the Neptune, which departed Paris on September 23, 1870, and landed safely over 100 kilometers away. The service became highly organized. Balloons were launched under the cover of fog or darkness to avoid enemy fire. Each balloon was fitted with a basic navigation system and carried maps, compasses, and sandbags for ballast. Flights were dangerous. Balloonists risked being shot down, blown off course, or captured. Despite these risks, the balloon mail system was remarkably successful. During the siege, more than 2 million letters and dispatches were sent from Paris. This innovation preserved vital links between the besieged capital and the outside world, allowing the French government to continue functioning and citizens to maintain contact with the distant relatives and officials. The use of balloon mail in Paris became a landmark in airmail history. It demonstrated the resilience and ingenuity of communication under extreme pressure and laid a foundation for later developments in air-based postal delivery. Telephones. The telephone is one of the most transformative inventions in modern communication. It enabled the transmission of voice over long distances and became a cornerstone of both personal and commercial interaction. Before electromagnetic telephones, mechanical acoustic devices were used to transmit sound across limited distances. The simplest example is the string telephone, two cups connected by a taut string, which relied on mechanical vibrations. Versions of this concept have been found as far back as the 7th century AD among the Chimu people of Peru, and were further studied by Robert Hooke in the 17th century. During the late 1800s, some companies even marketed acoustic telephones as alternatives to electric ones, although their limited range quickly rendered them obsolete once electromagnetic versions gained traction. The invention of the telephone. The invention of the telephone is a subject of ongoing debate. Several individuals contributed key developments, including Antonio Meucci, Johann Philipp Reis, Elisha Gray, and Alexander Graham Bell. Bell is most often credited with inventing the first practical telephone. In 1876, he received the first U.S. patent for an apparatus for transmitting vocal or other sounds telegraphically. Controversy surrounded this patent, especially regarding whether Bell independently invented the telephone or derived aspects of it from Gray's work. Despite lawsuits and legislative debates, Bell's patents were upheld, securing his dominant role in the early telephone industry. Meanwhile, in 2002, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a resolution acknowledging Meucci's contributions to telephone development. In response, Canada's Parliament declared Bell the official inventor, illustrating the ongoing international interest in the telephone's origins. Development of telephone technology. Early telephones were technically diverse. Some used liquid transmitters, others relied on magnetic coils. The most successful design featured carbon transmitters, developed and refined by Thomas Edison, which amplified sound efficiently. These became the standard well into the 20th century. Initially, telephones were sold or leased in pairs, and connected by users themselves, usually between homes and businesses. With no centralized network, each connection required its own line. Western Union and other telegraph companies quickly saw the potential and adapted their existing infrastructure. In 1877 and 1878, Edison developed the carbon microphone, improving clarity and volume. It was used in combination with Bell receivers and remained common for decades. Around this time, the candlestick telephone emerged, a compact model where the transmitter stood on a stem and the receiver hung from a hook. Later innovations combined the receiver and transmitter into a single handset, placed on a cradle base. Rotary dials replaced operator-assisted connections, and by the 1930s, centralized power from telephone exchanges replaced the need for local batteries. Telephone exchange. The telephone exchange made it possible for users to call one another without requiring a direct line. It was first proposed by Hungarian engineer Tivadar Puskás in 1876 and implemented in 1878 in New Haven, Connecticut, by George W. Coy. His switchboard could support 64 users, though only 2 calls could be handled simultaneously. From this innovation, the first telephone directory was published, and within a few years, telephone exchanges began spreading rapidly, enabling scalable and commercial telephony, global expansion, and teledensity. By the 1890s, telephone usage was rising quickly in Europe and North America. Sweden led the world in teledensity, telephones per 100 people, followed by New Zealand and Switzerland. The United States caught up and eventually surpassed other nations in the early 20th century due to the expiration of Bell's patents, which allowed independent telephone companies to flourish. 20th century innovations. As technology advanced, the telephone became more user-friendly and reliable. The rotary dial simplified calling. Standardized handsets became widespread. In 1927, the first commercial transatlantic telephone service was established, connecting North America and Europe. Later in the century, the introduction of touch-tone dialing began to replace rotary mechanisms. Automatic exchanges replaced manual operators. The network infrastructure grew exponentially, enabling not just national but global voice communication, telephone exchange. The development of the telephone exchange was a crucial milestone in making the telephone a viable communication tool for the masses. Without it, early telephones could only connect 2 fixed locations directly. Each telephone pair required its own dedicated wire, which limited scalability and practicality. Hungarian engineer Tivadar Puskás is credited with proposing the concept of a telephone exchange in 1876. The first operational exchange was established in New Haven, Connecticut, by George W. Coy in January 1878. His manually operated switchboard could serve up to 64 subscribers, though only 2 calls could be active at the same time. The telephone exchange allowed users to connect to any other subscriber on the network through a centralized switchboard managed by human operators. This model quickly spread across the United States and Europe, forming the foundation for the first telephone networks. Early telephone directories. Shortly after exchanges were introduced, the first telephone directories were published. The very first was issued in 1878 by the New Haven District Telephone Company. It contained just 50 names, no phone numbers, since all calls were placed through the operator. Directories soon expanded as telephone adoption grew, becoming essential tools for businesses and residents alike. Over time, phone books evolved into both white pages for residential listings and yellow pages for commercial advertisements. Teledensity and international adoption. By the end of the 19th century, telephone use had expanded significantly in industrialized countries. Sweden, New Zealand, Switzerland, and the United States led in teledensity, defined as the number of telephones per 100 people. In the US, Bell's patents expired in the 1890s, leading to a boom in independent telephone companies. This competition spurred rapid expansion. In contrast, many European countries had centralized, state-controlled networks, resulting in slower but more uniform growth. Technical advancements and standardization. During the early 20th century, several important technical improvements made telephone service more efficient and accessible. Common battery systems replaced the need for each telephone to have its own local battery. Instead, power was provided centrally by the telephone exchange. Rotary dials began to replace operator-assisted calls, allowing users to dial numbers directly. The dial pulse would automatically trigger switching relays at the exchange. Handsets were introduced, combining the transmitter and receiver into a single unit. This improved convenience and helped standardize telephone design. Automatic exchanges pioneered by Almond Stroger in the 1890s reduced reliance on human operators. The Stroger switch became the basis for automated switching technology used throughout much of the 20th century. To long-distance communication. In 1915, the first transcontinental telephone call was made in the United States between New York and San Francisco. President Woodrow Wilson was among the speakers on the line, symbolizing the promise of nationwide voice communication. 12 years later, in 1927, the first commercial transatlantic telephone service was launched using radio waves to connect London and New York. Though expensive and limited in quality, it marked the beginning of true international voice telephony. By the 1930s and 1940s, long-distance infrastructure continued to improve with the introduction of coaxial cables and more advanced switching equipment, the rise of direct distance dialing. One of the most impactful changes in telephone communication came in the mid-20th century with the introduction of direct distance dialing, DDD. This innovation allowed users to place long-distance calls without operator assistance. Implemented in the United States beginning in 1951, DDD made the telephone more autonomous, efficient, and convenient. It relied on area codes and complex switching systems that could route calls across the country with no manual intervention. This system laid the groundwork for global direct dialing systems introduced later in the 20th century, touch-tone dialing and digital systems. In 1963, touch-tone dialing was introduced by Bell Telephone. This system replaced rotary dials with a keypad that generated specific audio tones, dual-tone multi-frequency, or DTMF, corresponding to each key press. It allowed for faster dialing and more complex signaling between phones and switching systems. Touch-tone phones were easier to use and opened the door to automated services such as telephone banking, voicemail systems, and interactive menus. As telephone networks became increasingly digitized, analog switching systems gave way to digital exchanges capable of handling much higher call volumes with better sound quality and reliability. Telephone in the home and society. By the 1970s and 1980s, the telephone had become a common fixture in homes and offices across much of the world. It revolutionized social behavior, enabling people to stay in contact with distant friends and family, conduct business, and respond instantly to emergencies. The telephone's influence on society was profound, shaping everything from journalism and governance to personal relationships and commercial logistics. Summary: the history of the telephone is a story of continuous innovation, from mechanical devices and early experiments to electromagnetic communication, exchanges, long-distance connectivity, and finally, the digital systems we rely on today. What began as a simple concept, transmitting voice over wire, evolved into a global network that redefined how humans interact, bridging physical distances and transforming the pace of modern life. Mobile phones. A mobile phone, often called a cell phone in North America, is a portable telephone that connects to a network via radio waves. Unlike fixed landlines, mobile phones can operate while users are on the move, using a network of cellular towers connected to the public switched telephone network, PSTN. Modern mobile phones offer much more than voice communication. They support services like text and multimedia messaging, email, internet access via LTE, 5G, or Wi-Fi, and short-range technologies such as Bluetooth and infrared. They also serve as digital cameras, video recorders, music players, gaming devices, GPS navigators, and even mobile payment terminals. Phones with limited functionality are called feature phones, while devices with advanced computing capabilities are known as smartphones. History of mobile telephony. The roots of mobile communication date back to early two-way radios used in vehicles, like police cars or trains. These early systems were bulky and required vehicle installation. In 1947, Bell Labs engineers Douglas H. Ring and W. Ray Young proposed a cellular system using hexagonal cells and directional antennas, concepts that laid the groundwork for mobile networks but couldn't be realized until decades later due to technical limitations. The first real breakthrough came on April 3, 1973, when Martin Cooper of Motorola placed the first public call from a handheld mobile phone. His prototype weighed about 2 kilograms and marked the beginning of handheld cellular communication. In 1979, Japan's NTT launched the world's first commercial cellular network. In 1983, Motorola's Dynatac 8000X became the first handheld mobile phone available for consumers. Generational advances: 1G to 5G, 1G, analog. The first generation of mobile networks, introduced in the 1980s, supported voice calls using analog signals. Systems like NMT in Scandinavia and AMPS in the US allowed greater call capacity but lacked security and data capability. 2G, digital GSM. Launched in 1991, GSM introduced encrypted digital communication and enabled SMS and MMS messaging. It also allowed mobile internet access at modest speeds. 3G, starting in 2001. 3G improved data transfer speed significantly, enabling video calls, mobile broadband, and app-based services. 4G, LTE. Introduced in 2009, 4G offered even faster speeds, supporting HD video streaming, mobile gaming, and real-time services. It became the global standard by the mid-2010s. 5G. The rollout of 5G networks began in 2019, offering gigabit-level download speeds and ultra-low latency. It enables applications like augmented reality, autonomous vehicles, and massive-scale IoT. Digital telephone technology. The shift from analog to digital telephony was made possible by advances in semiconductor technology, particularly metal oxide semiconductor, MOS, integrated circuits. This allowed the development of compact, reliable, and efficient digital telephones. Key breakthroughs include pulse code modulation, PCM, a method of converting analog voice signals into digital form, crucial for modern telecommunications. Push-button dialing, replacing rotary dials. Push-button phones used MOS logic circuits to generate signals. Early models could even store numbers for speed dialing using MOS memory chips. Touch-tone phones, Bell's Touch-O-Matic, in the early 1970s, could store up to 32 numbers. It was powered by low-cost, low-power MOSFET technology. Digitization of switching systems. From the 1980s onward, central telephone exchanges, PBX systems, and even user devices began using very large-scale integration VLSI digital chips, improving call clarity and system reliability. Women and the telephone. The telephone influenced social dynamics as well as technology. It became central to the structure of suburban life and the management of both households and businesses. Women in particular played a significant role in this evolution, both as operators and users. Historically, women were the majority of telephone operators. Though the work was low-paying and demanding, it provided job opportunities at a time when few were available. Socially, women often acted as communicators for families, scheduling appointments, and managing relationships across the private and public spheres. 21st century developments. Today, the telephone exists in many forms, from smartphones to Voice over Internet Protocol, VoIP, systems. VoIP technology, which sends voice as data over the internet, has begun to rival both traditional landlines and mobile networks. It enables low-cost global calls, often free via Wi-Fi, and powers services like Skype, Zoom, and WhatsApp. Telecommunication has now converged with computing. Smartphones combine cameras, GPS, entertainment, and connectivity into one compact device. Touchscreens have replaced physical dials, and users now interact primarily through apps. Fax-a-fax, short for facsimile, is the transmission of scanned printed material, both text and images, over a telephone line to a machine connected to a printer or display device. The original document is scanned and converted into a bitmap image, which is then encoded as audio tones and sent through the telephone system. The receiving machine decodes the tones and reconstructs the image, printing it out as a physical copy. Early fax systems worked in analog mode, translating image darkness into tone frequencies. Since the 1980s, most fax transmissions have been digital, using data compression to speed up the transmission of repetitive or blank areas. Although fax was initially a niche tool, it became a standard office device in the 1980s and 1990s. Today, however, fax usage has declined sharply due to the rise of email and internet-based communication, though faxes remain in use in sectors like healthcare and law enforcement, where paper trails are often legally required. Telephone and wireless transmission. In 1924, Atent transmitted 15 photographs via telephone from Cleveland to New York, images clear enough for newspaper publication. Around the same time, RCA engineer Richard H. Ranger created the photoradiogram, the first transoceanic radio facsimile system. One of the first photos sent wirelessly was of U.S. President Calvin Coolidge in 1924, transmitted from New York to London. In the 1930s, the Finch facsimile system delivered radio newspapers to homes via AM radio and thermal printers. However, the public favored printed newspapers and regular radio, limiting the system's success. By the 1940s, fax technology was miniaturized enough to fit into Western Union's delivery vehicles. In 1960, the U.S. Army used a satellite to send the first photo facsimile from a test site to Puerto Rico. Modern fax machines. A major leap occurred in 1964 when Xerox introduced the LDX, long-distance xerography, considered the first commercially viable fax machine. In 1966, they released the Magnafax Telecopier, a smaller, more user-friendly unit weighing about 21 kilograms, 46 pounds. It could connect to a standard phone line and transmit a page in 6 minutes. This marked the beginning of fax's rise in business communication. Companies like Daycom further advanced the technology, creating the first sub-minute fax machine using digital compression originally developed for satellite imaging, digital transmission, and global standardization. In the 1970s and 1980s, Japanese manufacturers entered the market, leading to price drops and wider adoption. Until then, many fax machines used proprietary methods that were not interoperable. That changed with international standards. Group 2 faxes, ITU-TT.3, 1976, offered limited compatibility requiring about 3 minutes per page. Group 3 faxes, ITU-TT.30 and T.4, 1980, allowed digital compression and interoperability. Transmission time dropped to 40 seconds per page and later as low as 15 seconds. Group 4 faxes. Designed for use with ISDN networks, offering higher resolution and faster transmission over digital lines. In 1985, GammaLink introduced GammaFax, the first PC-based fax board allowing computers to send and receive faxes directly. 21st century usage and decline. Despite their decline, fax machines continue to exist in specialized environments. In Japan, faxes are still widely used for cultural and writing system reasons. As of 2020, over 81% of convenience stores in Japan offered fax services. During the COVID-19 pandemic, faxes were criticized in Japan for causing delays and data errors in case reporting. In Canada, 2/3 of doctors surveyed in 2018 reported primarily using faxes to communicate with other medical professionals. In the United States, hospitals and clinics often prefer faxing to email due to strict privacy regulations such as HIPAA. Many businesses have replaced standalone fax machines with fax servers and digital solutions that deliver faxes via email or web apps. These systems reduce costs, eliminate paper waste, and enhance security, technical capabilities. Fax machines are categorized by group and class, defining their transmission speed and resolution. Most legacy analog models, Group 1 and 2, are now obsolete. Group 3, transmit one page in 15 seconds, with multiple resolution options, for example, 200 dp standard, 400 dpi superfine, up to 400, and 8 dp ultrafine. Group 4, operate over digital ISDN networks at speeds up to 64 kbits. They support advanced compression, high resolution, and document exchange protocols based on ITU-T standards like T6 and T.563. A pager, also known as a beeper or bleeper, is a wireless telecommunications device that receives and displays alphanumeric or voice messages. There are different types of pagers. One-way pagers, which can only receive messages. Response pagers, which allow limited acknowledgments. Two-way pagers, which can send and receive messages using internal transmitters. Pagers operate as part of a paging system, which includes one or more base transmitters, and a network of pagers carried by users. These systems range from simple local units used in restaurants to nationwide networks with thousands of high-powered transmitters. History. The first telephone pager system was patented in 1949 by Al Gross, originally designed for physicians. However, there was initial resistance to being constantly on call. One of the earliest practical paging services launched in 1950 in New York City. Doctors paid a monthly fee and carried a pager weighing about 200 grams, which could receive messages within a 40-kilometer, 25-mile radius. In 1960, John Francis Mitchell of Motorola developed the first transistorized pager, combining elements of walkie-talkie and car radio technology. This innovation made pagers smaller and more accessible. In 1962, the Bell System introduced the Bellboy radio paging system at the Seattle World's Fair, the first commercial personal pager. It used solid-state circuits and 3 tuned reed relays to receive messages. When all 3 were activated, the pager buzzed, prompting the user to call a service center for the message. Wider adoption. In the 1980s, tone and voice pagers became popular among emergency responders and professionals. By the 1990s, pagers were common among the public as affordable, compact, and reliable alternatives to mobile phones. The reflex protocol, introduced in the mid-1990s, enabled two-way messaging, making pagers more interactive and useful for coordination. Decline and survival. As mobile phones became smaller, cheaper, and text-capable, most general users abandoned pagers. Motorola stopped producing new pagers in 2001. Yet pagers persisted in niche markets, especially in hospitals, where they're still used due to reliable signal coverage. Rural emergency services, where mobile networks may not reach. Disaster scenarios such as the 2005 London bombings, where traditional networks failed but pagers continued to function. Even in 2020, the UK's National Health Service still used over 130,000 pagers, about 10% of the world's total. Phasing out began in 2019, with plans to replace them with modern communication tools. International usage. In Japan, over 10 million pagers were active in 1996. The final paging service shut down in October 2019. Russia discontinued its last pager network in November 2021. In Canada, over 160,000 users paid for pager service as late as 2013. Use cases in culture beyond healthcare and emergency services. Pagers have been used in restaurants to alert customers when tables are ready, birdwatching communities, particularly in the UK and Ireland, where rare bird alerts are broadcast to pager subscribers. Military and intelligence operations, where low-power one-way pagers are valued for discretion, technology, and protocols. Paging systems use dedicated RF channels to transmit a pager's address and message. Common protocols include 2-tone and 5/6-tone, POXAG, Flex, Hermes, and Golay reflex for two-way paging. Many systems use simulcast transmission, broadcasting the same signal from multiple transmitters on the same frequency. This ensures the strongest signal is received and improves reliability, especially when satellite and GPS timing are used for synchronization. Modern paging systems often support direct connection protocols like TAP, TNPP, SNPP, and WCTP web interfaces and integration with voicemail, PBX, and escalation systems. Security and privacy one-way pagers have certain privacy advantages. Because they only receive messages and don't transmit data, their locations can't be tracked. However, the message must be broadcast over the entire coverage area, meaning it could be intercepted by anyone with the right receiver. Controversial use. In 2024, pagers were reportedly used by Hezbollah to evade mobile network surveillance. According to reports, Israel used this vulnerability to track and attack members using pagers in Lebanon and Syria, resulting in dozens of casualties. This highlighted that while pagers offer certain advantages, they are not immune to exploitation. Mobile phones. A mobile phone, also known as a cell phone, is a portable communication device that connects to a cellular network to transmit voice and data. Unlike fixed landlines, mobile phones can be used anywhere within network coverage, offering users unprecedented mobility. Modern mobile phones are far more than just telephones. They function as multi-purpose digital devices, allowing users to send text messages, browse the internet, take photos and videos, navigate via GPS, stream media, and access thousands of applications. Today's smartphones combine the functionality of cameras, computers, gaming consoles, and payment systems in a single device. Early mobile communication. The earliest form of mobile communication began with two-way radio systems, often installed in vehicles and used by police, military, and emergency services. These systems were not true mobile phones, as they relied on central dispatchers and functioned more like walkie-talkies than private phones. In 1949, Bell Labs introduced the first commercial mobile telephone service in St. Louis. However, the equipment was bulky, expensive, and limited in capacity. Only a few dozen calls could be handled at a time within a given city. A conceptual breakthrough came in 1947 when Bell Labs engineers Douglas H. Ring and W. Ray Young proposed the cellular network model, dividing service areas into small cells with frequency reuse, allowing more simultaneous users. The idea was ahead of its time. Technology to make it practical wouldn't exist for decades. The first mobile phone call. The first truly portable handheld mobile phone was demonstrated on April 3, 1973 by Martin Cooper of Motorola. Standing on a sidewalk in New York City, he called his rival at Bell Labs from a 2-kilogram prototype, saying, "I'm calling you from a mobile phone, a real handheld mobile phone." This marked the beginning of personal mobile telephony, although commercial availability was still a decade away. Generations of mobile networks' mobile phone technology evolved through a series of generational leaps. 1G, first generation, launched in Japan in 1979 and in the US in 1983. 1G networks used analog signals. Phones like the Motorola Dynatac 8000X were large, expensive, and offered only voice calls. Coverage and call quality were limited, but it was a breakthrough in wireless communication. 2G, second generation. Introduced in 1991 with the GSM standard, 2G marked the shift to digital. It allowed encrypted voice communication, text messaging, SMS, and basic data services. Phones became smaller and more affordable, and global roaming became possible. 2.5G, GPRS, General Packet Radio Service, offered always-on internet connectivity, enabling email and light web browsing. 3G, third generation. Launched in the early 2000s, 3G increased data speed significantly. It enabled mobile video calls, faster web browsing, multimedia messaging, and app-based services. It also paved the way for mobile computing. 4G, fourth generation. First deployed in 2009, 4G LTE networks revolutionized mobile internet, with download speeds reaching 100 megabits per second or more. 4G supported HD video streaming, online gaming, VoIP services, and large-scale mobile app ecosystems. 5G, fifth generation, began rolling out globally in 2019. It offers ultra-low latency, massive bandwidth, and peak download speeds in the gigabit range. 5G is designed to support autonomous vehicles, remote surgeries, smart cities, industrial IoT, and other high-demand applications, smartphones, and the app revolution. While early mobile phones were primarily used for voice communication, the introduction of the smartphone fundamentally changed how people interact with mobile technology. In 1992, IBM released the Simon Personal Communicator, considered the first smartphone. It featured a touchscreen, calendar, calculator, and rudimentary apps. In 2007, Apple's iPhone revolutionized the market, with a sleek touch interface and the App Store, enabling third party developers to create applications for every imaginable use. This model was quickly adopted by Android manufacturers, leading to a smartphone boom. Today, mobile phones are indispensable tools for both work and daily life. Over 6 billion people own a mobile phone, and for many, it's their primary or only access to the internet. Global impact. The mobile phone has had profound societal effects. Economically, it's empowered small businesses, especially in developing countries. Socially, it has reshaped communication, reducing reliance on landlines and mail. Culturally, it's changed how people consume media, navigate cities, and form relationships. Mobile banking, ride sharing, telemedicine, and e learning are just a few industries transformed by mobile technology. Environmental and ethical concerns. The production of mobile phones raises important issues. E waste. Rapid phone replacement cycles contribute to mounting electronic waste. Recycling programs are in place, but uptake is limited. Resource extraction. Mining for rare earth elements and conflict minerals poses environmental and human rights concerns. Energy consumption. Although smartphones are energy efficient, billions of devices and supporting data centers consume substantial electricity. Efforts to create longer lasting, repairable, and ethically sourced phones are ongoing, but challenges remain. Future of mobile technology. As 5G networks expand, mobile phones are expected to play even greater roles in automation, augmented reality, remote work, and smart infrastructure. Emerging technologies like foldable displays, AI enhanced cameras, and neural interfaces are already shaping the next generation of mobile devices. In time, mobile phones may evolve beyond handheld devices, integrating into wearables, implants, or voice activated systems. Whatever the form, their role as central hubs of digital life is unlikely to change.